A smart light strip can brighten up a room, backlight TVs and computers, be used to light your way when getting out of bed, or it can even be used to notify you visually of events. It's a centerpiece, and yet it's often behind our furniture, providing that ambience and those effects that we know and love. But there are so many options on the market today, and while we could try and cover them all, I think it's best to educate you on how to pick a light strip and what features to look for. So today I'm going to compare 6 models that all bring different advantages and disadvantages. If you're picking from one of our 6 strips today, then you're going to be able to make a great decision. But even if you're not, I'm going to prepare you for the next purchase you make. Now here are our 6 smart light strips and some of the reasons they made the review. This is the Govee M1 light strip. It costs $60 US for 2 meters and can be extended up to 5 meters. Now the one we're talking about today is the second version of one of the most colorful and effect-filled light strips. It boasts 60 beautiful RGBW LEDs per meter. 64 pre-created effects, a music mode, can synchronize with your television, your PC, and other Govee lights. And on top of all of this, it has a number of DIY effect creation modes that let you create anything you can dream up. Those different effects are so impressive because this is an addressable light strip, which means you can put multiple colors on it at the same time, and even pick where those colors sit. The Govee M1 comes with bracing clips and even some screws in case you need those. Plus the adapter is lightweight and there are 3M stickers everywhere you need them. Plus this is such a thin light strip, it's easy to bend and the sticky tape is incredibly strong. All of this combines to create an easy installation and one that will last for a very long time. Now once the M1 is installed, the Govee app is easy and pretty fun to use. Plus the M1 connects to Amazon, Google, Apple HomeKit, Samsung SmartThings, and more platforms for basic control. The reason it can connect to all of those platforms is because it features Matter over Wi-Fi. That's what makes this second version even better than the last one, because now Govee's everywhere. One of its direct competitors is the Nanoleaf Essentials Matter over Thread light strip. It's also a 2 meter strip, but it can be extended to 10 meters. It comes in at $10 less than the Govee M1, but it's a single color light strip. So while you can download nearly unlimited effects from their online community, and you can use a Nanoleaf desktop app to sync your strip to your PC, you're only going to be able to display one color at a time. Now colors are made by 5 different LEDs on this light strip working together, which is in stark contrast to the single LED being used to make all of the colors on the Govee M1. Nanoleaf is generating colors with a combination of 2 LEDs with a lower Kelvin orange color, 2 LEDs with a higher Kelvin white color, and a single RGB LED. All of these LEDs leave us with the brightest light strip we tested. In fact, its lumen scores are in some cases 10 times higher than other LED strips. But a funny thing happens when we get to the colors. More on that later. Now, it's one of the biggest and thickest light strips we work with, which leaves you with a number of restrictions when it comes to installation. There's also not much else that you get with this, so you might need some accessories when you go to buy this LED strip. However, once it's installed, because this is a Matter over Thread device, it has access to all the same platforms as the Govee M1. And I would say that this is the best connectivity technology that could be used on a light strip today. This is the paper-thin SwitchBot Wi-Fi LED strip. It's so thin that it can be bent to 180 degrees in almost every spot on the strip. Plus it's a 5 meter strip, that's only $20. Now from a specification standpoint, SwitchBot's light strip is fairly simple, but it actually holds up on many of the basic specs you'll be looking for. Since it works in the SwitchBot app, it has access to a lot of automation options that other strips in this review just don't have. SwitchBot sells a lot of products and their automation engine is fairly strong. On top of that, SwitchBot provides a lot of connectivity options through their app, and although this strip doesn't have Matter with its Wi-Fi connectivity, the only major platform that you would be missing with this light strip would be Apple HomeKit. Now the app provides a number of effects, and the strip can use a music mode that operates off of the microphone sitting on the controller. Plus, this is the only LED strip that you get an IR-based remote with when you buy it, which gives you an additional few options for control. There's also an effect creation tool, but don't get too excited because it's a single color light strip. Its LED density is very low and it's not very bright. Having said that, once you have it installed, I think it looks very interesting in the right location, and that installation is one of the easiest that I've ever seen because the material is so easy to work with. From the cheapest to the most expensive with the Philips Hue gradient light strip. There are many versions of this strip, and this specific one cost me 200 bucks. It's the only one with a less transparent look, but it's definitely the best feeling and the light strip with the most luxurious looks. If you're looking at this light strip carefully, you'll see that Signify is using a 3 LED combination to replicate their colors. It's an extremely vibrant light strip, and it definitely features some of the best looking colors. It's also a multicolored light strip, and Philips Hue has a large number of scene effects, plus a few live effects like candlelight and fireplace. The Philips Hue app also allows you to control this with many other Philips Hue lights, and they have some accessories like controllers and motion sensors that would allow you to turn this on in a number of ways. Now this light strip uses Zigbee to communicate with the Philips Hue hub, and although that's an extra cost, this is a highly reliable system that gives you access to every major smart home platform on the planet. In fact, there is no other system with more compatibility than Philips Hue when it comes to lighting. However, on top of the expense, this light strip is very hard to work with because of its physical attributes. It's thick and very stiff.
That's what he said, right, guys?
And you're not even allowed to bend it in a certain direction.
That's what she said.
I know there's something dirty I should be saying right now, but I actually feel like I just did it.
That's what she said.
So you will really have to pick where you're going to install this light strip, but once you've made that decision, you're going to really enjoy the look and feel. And much to the chagrin of Paul Hibbert, this light strip is one of the brightest when it comes to colors. It's just not so bright in the whites, which is a lot like the Govee M1 and our next light strip. TP-Link recently launched this light strip called the Tapo C930-5. It's a 5-meter light strip that costs just 50 bucks, but it can't be extended. So it's a very long strip straight out of the box, and it features one of the larger effect libraries in this review. Plus it has a DIY effect creation tool, and there's even a coloring mode that allows you to pick the color for all 50 zones on this light strip. So that means it's an addressable light strip, and you can control the LEDs in sets of 3. The colors and even the whites look nice as they're being built by a single white LED and a single RGB LED, but this strip is very dark when compared to others, and some of the effect creation tools leave a little to be desired. In fact, later in today's video, I'll explain how just a slight tweak in these effect creation tools could make this one of the most useful strips, but it's just not there today. Now from an installation standpoint, this is incredibly easy, and although I was initially worried because some of the backing on the tape was coming off after getting it out of the box, this has stayed stuck to the underside of my bed for many weeks now. It was also really quick to install, and although it uses Wi-Fi and does not feature any Matter connectivity, this has been reliable and it natively connects to all the major smart home platforms because TP-Link has always been great at doing that. Which brings us to our last light strip, which comes from Eve. Now you're forgiven if you thought this was Nanoleaf's strip again, because there aren't many differences between the two. Physically, it is very similar, and it's a single color light strip too. But this one uses Wi-Fi only to connect to your home, and it's also another $10 more expensive. It's a 2-meter strip that can be extended to 10 meters, but again, this is going to be very hard to bend, and you can really only bend it in one direction. Now today, Eve only has an app for iOS devices, and although I'm told that that will change later this year, that means you can only use this with Apple HomeKit today. There's also not any real effects, but it is one of a few of the light strips in today's review that can do the adaptive lighting feature that shifts the white light on this strip over the course of a day to mimic the sun. The color reproduction is excellent, and this is the second brightest light strip when it's displaying its whites through the cluster of 3 LEDs. But the story behind brightness and colors is going to be very different than you're expecting. So let's start to break down which of these strips are the best, and I'll continue to give you what knowledge I have about light strips in our comparison review. Hello Automators, thanks for tuning in again. I'm Brian from Automate Your Life, and I'm here to save you time with the smart tech in your life. So let's do that. Now I have a full spreadsheet that you can download off of our website, as I do with most of our larger guides. And of course I've made that for free for you. So it'll give you some of those details that I didn't include in today's review and give you that tabular format. Probably the biggest thing you're going to want to know about a light strip is how it's going to look in your home and what options it gives you for different looks. And I think visually, one of the biggest features is how many colors you can put on a light strip, and then how you can use those colors. Now here's a table, and while I've already mentioned that only some of these light strips can take on more than one color, what isn't necessarily clear is how many LEDs have to have the same color. You can see that both Philips Hue and Govee can produce a new color every 6 LEDs, whereas the Tapo can take a new color every 3. That's a lot of colors on a 5-meter strip. And it's all well and good to put lots of colors on a light strip, but you have to be able to do something exciting with that. As we continue to build this table out, what you'll notice is that today, Eve can't even shift between colors, whereas everything else can. All of the other light strips can fade or blink between colors, and the multicolor strips can do this per segment. But let's break this down even further, and we start to see some light strips emerging as the better options. Now here are a set of features that you could expect on a standard light strip. Music, TV, and PC synchronization features are pretty abundant. Some of the light strips have adaptive lighting, which means they synchronize with the color temperature of the sun, and many provide those basic features like transition control, which means the strip will fade between effects or colors. But there are 3 features that really start to push a few of these light strips into an entirely different echelon of product. When you look at the effect offerings, Nanoleaf, Eve, and SwitchBot can only offer you a single color at any time, which means that their effects are at best a fade or a blink type of transition to switch between colors. Then we start to get into those multicolor light strips. Now Tapo has 17 pre-created effects that they give you access to, and then 2 modes to build your own effects. There's a coloring mode where you can choose the color for all those 50 segments, but what I was really disappointed in with this was that it didn't save any of my colors that I'd chosen, and I couldn't choose no color on a segment. The effect creation tool is also a little weak because you could just start with one of their 17 pre-created effects and then change colors and a few other things. Now stepping up from there is Philips Hue. They have a lot of great effects and their strip looks amazing. However, they only have 2 live effects. Candle, which I would call very weak with a light strip, and Fireplace, which I think is pretty nice. After that, you're gonna have to look at third-party applications to do anything else. Although, it is nice that you can synchronize the color scheme of this with other Philips Hue lights in their app. And then we get to Govee, which has essentially unlimited numbers of effects, because not only do they give you 64 with this specific light strip, but they also give you all kinds of DIY modes. Not only can you pick the color on all 20 segments of a 2-meter strip, but you can get those colors moving, and you can even download effects that other users have created and shared. Of course, if you want, you can create your own effects with a really comprehensive tool, and after all of that is said and done, you can build a sequence of effects, and anytime you turn on the light strip, you can play that sequence. There's also one more effect that we have to talk about with Govee, and That's the music, TV, and scene synchronization features. With Govee's app, you can set one device to be the controller, and then other products can essentially follow along. This allowed me to pair the M1 with the Govee Lyra and my T2 backlight to have all three of those products synchronize with the content that's on my television screen. Plus, I can pick different parts of the screen for each device to synchronize with, so you can create a really comprehensive backlighting effect, and I plan to add more Govee products to an already impressive setup. Now, it's all well and good to have all these effects, but you don't always want to have the company's app open, so it's important how you can use those effects outside of the manufacturer's app. Again, we kind of have this breakdown where the single color strips don't send their scenes out to any other app or system. So you're gonna need their app all the time, or you're gonna need to leave that strip always running the same effect. It's painful and really unusable long term. Now, Tapo and Govee both send their scenes and many of their modes to Amazon, but Hue has that option with Google, Amazon, and SmartThings. Although with SmartThings, you'll need the right setup done. Link below for that tutorial. Now here's something interesting to consider with these light strips. They can all be used in automations, but those scenes can be really beneficial because you can create these specialized automations in those systems that use the effects. I wanted to use the Tapo light strip with SmartThings or with Amazon, connect a couple of motion sensors and place those on the sides of my bed. That way, if I or my partner are getting out of bed on our side, the light strip would just light up on that side, lighting the way but allowing the other person to sleep. And I was really excited because Tapo allows you to create a scene that adds the dimension of time. So the strip could turn on for however many seconds, then turn off through an Amazon routine with a single action. The problem with Tapo is you can't turn off any of those LEDs when you're using that coloring creation feature. If they had that, it would be really easy to accomplish this with one strip. Also, they don't allow there to be a different brightness per segment, and none of these strips do. So it's unfortunately not possible to do this, but I'm gonna talk to TP-Link on this one. Now don't worry, I'm going to show you some ideas for automating with these light strips later in the video. But in the end, there's only really three that I would recommend when we talk about effects, and it's pretty clear that Govee is running away with the features available on their products. There's just no one else keeping up, but there are some use cases for Hue that I like with SmartThings right now, and Tapo could get there if they just fixed a couple of those issues. With all of those features and effects being discussed, the next thing that matters is how these light strips look. Just like a lot of other electronics and industries, the specifications that you see on boxes and in marketing materials just doesn't matter that much. All of these have a CRI or a color rendering index of greater than 80. Not one of these companies has decided that it's important enough to achieve a great rating, which would be greater than 90. That means they're all relatively close in terms of the reproduction of colors, and it's going to be good, but not actually perfect. Also, CRI doesn't speak to color temperatures at all, so that's where we can find some differences. But in a few moments, I'll share my evaluation of these colors and how these strips reproduce them. Now, one of the most important things about these light strips is how bright they can get. But not only is the CRI specification relatively useless when comparing light strips, so is the lumens measurement that shows up on the box. There really doesn't seem to be a standard for how these things are measured, although you will see the brightest point for the light strip in some of those specifications, usually shown as luminous flux. Now to measure this, I set up a light meter 1 foot away from all of these light strips, and I tested them thoroughly. Not only did I test the different color temperatures, but I also tested the brightness when creating colors. Something extremely interesting happened when I did that. To start, it's pretty obvious that Nanoleaf and Eve, which are using those larger clusters of LEDs that contain specific white LEDs, are very bright. It might be surprising to you that Philips Hue has created the third brightest light strip, and actually, when you put that light strip at its lowest Kelvin rating or its lowest temperature, it's the brightest strip in the set. It's because it also has that cluster of LEDs. Now what's amazing about these light strips is how different the measurements for lumens are. When you look at the Tapo light strip, it initially seemed like it should be producing a fairly bright white. That's because you can look at the density of LEDs on their strip and you can see that they are one of the more dense strips. They have 150 sets of their 2 LED cluster every meter. But when I set all of these to their brightest color temperature and then I measured, the Nanoleaf strip had a lumens measurement of 10 times greater than the one that came off of Tapo's strip. Both Nanoleaf and Eve absolutely dominate in the whites because of that cluster of LEDs and the focus on white light. Now Tapo was incredibly dim, and even though its box says 1,000 lumens, we're talking about a 5-meter light strip. There's just not enough power going to each LED to drive a lot of light. Now it's funny to watch, but the Philips Hue light strip really dies off in the last 15% of brightness as it becomes almost a non-existent light source. But that just means you gotta pump up the brightness levels a little bit on that strip. But if you're looking for colors, this situation almost entirely flips. All of the color LEDs are based on RGB, which stands for red, green, blue. Now you'll notice that the LEDs all have these smaller light sources embedded within them, and because they are an RGB LED, there's one for each of those colors. What happens here is the light strips that are focused more on color reproduction instantly rise to the top. Govee was consistently the brightest light strip, with Philips Hue hanging around near the top. Even Tapo's strip suddenly becomes one of the brighter, or at least average, in this situation. But when you start to create some of those other colors that might use a little bit of white light mixed in with those RGB lights, something different happens again. Tapo falls right off in terms of brightness because it has to use that white LED that's just not bright enough. It ends up about the same brightness as Nanoleaf, Eve, and SwitchBot. And again, very consistently, Govee is at the top of their game and is producing bright and vibrant colors. It's because they're using that single LED, or what they call their RGB IC, all along the light strip. Each individual LED is producing whatever color you've asked for over and over and over again. And I like how simple their system looks and works. Now, when you really pay attention to how these strips are creating those colors, this is pink, for example, there are some minor differences, and they come from having those LEDs in the cluster. The Eve and Nanoleaf strips really use these white LEDs, and because they have access to 2 different ones, they're bringing those in quite often. Blue lights almost always include one of the white LEDs being turned on, but this actually changes based on the brightness setting for those. But I find the Eve color reproduction to look weird in yellow and orange, and even in some of the green and teals when I'm looking at the strip because of their use of those white LEDs, for example. The yellow actually seems green, but when you reflect it off a wall, everything comes out looking right. You might be wondering why there's such a difference between lumen levels on these light strips, and especially wondering why things change so much between white and color lights. I've been speaking with a lot of the manufacturers of these strips and pulling information about how their LEDs produce light. Now, you'll notice that Philips Hue, Nanoleaf, and Eve are all using warm white LEDs as well as cool white LEDs. This is a tactic that increases brightness across white lighting. It works especially well when both the warm white LEDs and the cool white LEDs have to be turned on to produce a mid-range color temperature. That's where strips like Govee, who use only a warm white LED in their bead, and Tapo, who have a single warm white LED in their cluster, fall off in terms of brightness when producing that mid-range white color temperature. That's why those same strips can be brighter in colors and in other color temperature ranges, especially the lower or warmer color temperatures, but then be far behind in those mid-ranges where strips like Nanoleaf put a ton of power into using 4 white LEDs. But we gotta give these strips some rankings here. If you wanna actually provide lighting with your light strip and use those color temperatures, then obviously Nanoleaf and Eve are at the top. You can extend those strips and run them around a room quite far too. But the truth is that I find the top end lumens of the Nanoleaf and Eve strips just isn't needed, and I would rather have the Govee and Hue strips for their color reproduction and attention to detail. I find them extremely vibrant and yet still bright enough when I want them to be. They're the right balance here in my eyes. The smart home technology often bridges the gap between the electronics in our home and the physical world. These LED strips are a true representation of that because the installation could be quite difficult and we're often left to figure all of this out on our own. So what you get in the box and how the company helps you get these installed in whatever situation you would like to use them in is really important. I'm gonna break down the situation really quickly for you, but if you're confused, just remember you can always ask in the comments. There are only a few light strips that give you some clips or accessories that help you turn corners. That's because those light strips are built to allow you to turn. Whereas 3 of these light strips really can't. Nanoleaf, Eve, and Hue are just intended to follow along a surface and they can bend around 90 degrees as long as you're not on one of these LEDs when you go to turn. Tapo, SwitchBot, and Govee can all do this fairly simple loop maneuver and making the turn a little easier for you. This could be such an issue with these other LED strips, and in fact, I broke some of the LEDs while testing a loop in my very expensive Hue light strip, which they tell you never to do. I now have a cluster of LEDs that almost always shows red instead of any other color, which is really quite frustrating when you spent as much as I did. But there's a process I would in general tell you to follow when you go to install a light strip in your home, and this will hopefully lessen the amount of failures you have and the amount of times you have to redo your light strip run, because that can be very painful and it can actually mean you have to buy little accessories or additional 3M tape strips. It can also mean you have to cut the strip and then actually solder things together. There's lots of tutorials for how to do those things, but in almost every case, if you're careful, you can avoid those pitfalls. Number 1, the first thing to do is identify whether or not the strip you're considering can turn a corner. And if it can't, and you need to turn a corner, then don't buy that strip. Number 2, then you need to measure how long your light strip needs to be. If you're over 2 meters, then you're gonna have to buy an extension kit for a lot of the light strips we're talking about today. To give you an idea, my 51-inch television was nearly 2 meters when following around the edge. My window and this bed frame was almost exactly 5 meters. So if it's under the length of the strip you're considering, you'll need to cut. Number 3, then check that you can get the light strip to start where you want it, which is to say that you need to make sure that the power cable and the adapter cable are long enough to reach from your outlet to where you want the lighting to start. Also check where your adapter is going to end up because some of those can be large and you might not want to see them at all. Number 4, then actually place the light strip up to the first turn. If you're gonna have to make the cornering maneuver that Govee shows in their manuals, then you're probably gonna be okay because you have a little bit of give and take. But if you're trying to go right around a corner with those Nanoleaf, Eve, or Hue light strips, then you'll have to pay attention to where the LEDs are. You might actually have to back up or move forward the light strip a few centimeters just to get things aligned right. Then you can try and check your second and third turns, but you probably need a second set of hands to make that happen. Before you install your light strip, I would get it set up in the company's application and leave it near the location you're gonna install it for half a day to a day. This just helps you to make sure that it's going to continually accept commands and that there's no bad interference getting in the way of your eventual installation. And then you can do the installation process, and it's usually very similar no matter what you buy. You'll clean the surface that you're going to attach to, and you'll only start to remove these adhesives when you're ready to actually attach it. So clean the surface, Then dry it or let it dry, and then start at the end of your light strip. Work your way along, pulling the adhesive cover off just a little bit at a time. Then make sure you're creating the best contact you can between the strip and the surface you're attaching it to. Run your fingers along the strip multiple times to make sure that you're leaving no air gap between the strip and the surface. Any air gap you leave will cause the light strip to break away from the surface over time, and you'll be left with something to fix. And as you come to the end of your run, you might find that you have extra. If you've measured correctly and checked where the cut points are on the strip, then you can just cut off the excess light strip as planned and attach the very end of the strip. If you didn't measure correctly, then unfortunately, you've attached your entire light strip and will have to redo it, which is a major issue for these because the adhesives all start to lose their stickiness as soon as they're exposed to air. Now, when I installed all of these light strips, except the Eve one, which I'll do right after I film this, I did find some key differences. In this table, you'll notice the distance between cut points, which is very far for a lot of these strips. Obviously, Tapo and SwitchBot are making this part of the situation easy. The ability to turn corners, we've already talked about, but when you can't turn a corner because an LED is in the way, the Philips Hue strip becomes very hard to work with. All the other strips are reasonable, but I think Hue has some extra bracing inside there because it's tough. I gave everyone a pretty good score when it came to the adhesives, but there's a little drop off when we talk about SwitchBot, and I could see a lot of people making mistakes with Tapo because that adhesive cover was coming off just as I was taking video of the strip to prep for this video. Also, I think a lot of people will make mistakes with Philips Hue because if you pull the adhesive cover off the wrong way, you'll actually pull off the entire adhesive, which I did initially, but I was able to repair. But I was frustrated with Philips Hue because of the bending issue and the adhesive issues. I know that you can get braces for the back of televisions and monitors to use this with, but reading about those, they're not high quality either. Now I'm happy now that it's installed, but it was a real pain to get that all right. The Nanoleaf strip, and I'm sure the Eve strip, don't have an adhesive issue, but they can't do those corner turns and their cut distance is fairly far apart. So they aren't difficult if you've planned things out right. So from an installation standpoint, I was really happy with how things went with Govee and Tapo. The adhesive is strong and they're fairly easy to plan out. I did find the cut distance is too long with Govee, and I hope they change that in the next version because that could limit some people in how they install those strips. The real winner in installation was SwitchBot. I can't believe how easy it was to go around a 5-meter light strip and attach that to a window. It fit perfectly, and every 10 centimeters I get a cut point. Plus, I can bend around any corner instantly, and working with that strip is remarkably easy. Now, of course, once you have them installed, connectivity and automation becomes king. From a connectivity standpoint, there's only 2 light strips that don't connect to all of the big 4 platforms. What I mean by that is Google, Amazon, Apple, and Samsung SmartThings. Now, those are SwitchBot, who misses out on HomeKit, and Eve, who misses out on a lot because they're really only that HomeKit device right now. But the next layer is the connectivity technology being used. In a lot of cases, you're going to find Wi-Fi is being used with light strips, and that means you have to have a stable and strong Wi-Fi system in your home that can handle more than just a few Wi-Fi devices in order to get a lot of these to behave well in an average smart home. Now, Philips Hue uses Zigbee to connect to their hub, so you'll need that hub, and Nanoleaf is using Thread, so you would need a Thread border router. Really, both of those are just different names for a hub that has a radio of the same type. Here are a few Thread border routers that you could bring into your home that would work with Nanoleaf's product. But that final layer to connectivity is something called Matter. Govee's new M1 strip has Matter over Wi-Fi, and Nanoleaf is using Matter over Thread. If I had to pick one, I would pick Thread because I think a lot of people will struggle to maintain those Wi-Fi networks when they get big. But I've never had trouble because I did a little bit of initial work on getting a stable and reliable Wi-Fi network into my home. Philips Hue will bring Matter to their entire lineup too, but right now Matter is a double-edged sword. It's great because it gave those devices access to the big four platforms, and it will give them more access later to systems like Habitat, Homey, and it should already bring them into Home Assistant. But the connectivity being offered by Matter is very basic. Any Matter-enabled device is just getting on and off, brightness, and color control on those big platforms. We're also seeing the addition of adaptive lighting in some cases, but it all comes without all of the fancy effects. In the case of Govee and Amazon, this actually means that you will want to use that light strip with Amazon without Matter. If you're using that Matter connectivity, you don't get access to all of the great effects inside of Amazon's app and while using their routine. However, if you use the standard connection process for Govee, you gain all of those great options. Now on the flip side, Govee and Nanoleaf having Matter have given us a ton of automation options with SmartThings and Apple HomeKit. So I'm happy to have that, but just understand that right now, Matter could be a detriment for you depending on what you use. So it's great that Govee has maintained that old connection method that gives us all those better options. Now we spoke earlier about the options with those effects and the scenes coming into different apps, but what really matters is how you can automate with these. Each major platform provides us with their own options for automations, and you're going to find the traditional hubs like Samsung SmartThings and Home Assistant have the most options for things like sensors and other devices to drive your automations. But here's how I used each light strip. Tapo's under my bed, and I'll eventually put those two motion sensors around it to know when someone's getting out of bed. Since it's connected to Samsung SmartThings and the automations are locally run, I can create really fast responses when somebody steps on the ground in the middle of the evening and then have that light strip come on. I want it to give me that option to turn on just part of the light strip, and if we manage to do that, then I'll be really excited. Otherwise, I might just cut that strip in half and install a second. Philips Hue is actually right in front of my computer monitors, and I was gonna stick it behind, but I thought it made a really great focal point in my office. I'm using that in conjunction with a presence sensor in the room, which turns it on when I go to sit down, and then will turn it off when I leave. I've put the Nanoleaf strip above my kitchen cabinet. It's a much better looking light source than the old IKEA lights I had up there, and I can use it in automations with Samsung SmartThings or any of those big platforms to notify me when a certain event occurs. For example, I've set it up so that I know when my front door lock is unlocked. It'll show a yellow status. I've done that with the Philips Hue strip in my office as well, so if I'm up there, I have that notice. I'm sure I'll add some more automations to those light strips in the future to tell me about different statuses. Now the Eve strip I intend to place around some of my gym equipment and include that in a scene in the Apple HomeKit app. I'm not gonna bother showing you that because my gym has no walls in it, so it doesn't exactly look nice, but it'll add a little bit of ambience and make the workouts feel a little nicer. With SwitchBot, I brought that strip into Samsung SmartThings and I've tied that to another LED strip in my kid's room through the SmartThings button that he has there. So he can turn on both of his LED strips, and it's a great effect when he's playing games with his friends. With Govee, I attached that strip to the T2 backlight system that I have on my TV in my bedroom. I'm gonna use those two together to make that TV synchronization look even better, and I probably will add an extension to that strip when I can. I want to make that really bright and really exciting and continue to add some of Govee's other light fixtures to that setup to just make it pop. I could also use it with a lot of Amazon's routines, and that opens up a number of motion sensor and door sensor options for me, but I think for now, just gonna leave it tied to that other backlight. But what was really interesting was that Govee allows me to set up some minor automations in their application. That meant that I could turn it on whenever the backlight T2 turned on and turn it off whenever that turned off. I could also do the reverse, which means I can now control my TV's backlighting through Apple HomeKit or Samsung SmartThings. This is really beneficial for me, and it's all because of Matter. Now there's one thing that I found out when speaking with Govee that you should know about that light strip. For the next couple of months, you're gonna be able to replace existing M1 strips with this new Matter version. And you can do that for free. They'll send you a new controller module, and all you have to do is fill out the form on their website. That means you can get that free Matter upgrade for your existing M1 strips, and I think all of you should take advantage of that right away. From an overall standpoint, I think it's pretty obvious that I'm preferring what Govee is doing. They have the best effects, the best colors, and the experience has been near perfect. From a physical and installation perspective, they manage the gap between convenience and quality, and I don't see a lot of cases where you're gonna mess up installation of that device. They also have great features when it comes to integrating with Amazon, and I hope they continue to expand that with some edge drivers for smart things, as well as hopefully an adaptive lighting feature with HomeKit. Now, if you're a HomeKit or a SmartThings person, I do think Philips Hue makes the most sense, even though it is so expensive. That's because it's a multicolor light strip, has adaptive lighting options, and the scene options in SmartThings. We also know that Philips Hue will continue to update their platform, and if you buy something like the Hue tap dial switch with it, it'll work out really well for control. Now, there's nothing truly wrong with any of the other light strips, and I hope you understand that you could fit a lot of those in different locations throughout your home and create really great experiences. I also hope you have a full understanding of how to get the best experience now with any light strip that you're looking at. And if you're looking at other smart home products, then you want to check out our other comparison reviews in the playlist that's up on screen now. Most recently, I reviewed 4 of the most popular video doorbells, and I think you'll be surprised with some of the results there. Otherwise, thanks for watching today, and of course, don't hate, automate.